My name is Boadi. I'm a partner at a company called Let's Move Africa. Let's Move Africa, we're involved in various aspects of African real estate and Africa infrastructure construction. Just to give you a brief outline of exactly what we do, our main ethos is around global governance, which basically means working with African governments to change policies that make business, the ease of business, much more efficient. It's very challenging, but nevertheless, someone has to do it. At the same time, we're very much involved in corporate social responsibility, meaning any projects that we're involved in Africa, any European companies that come in, we make sure that that particular company has a CSR attached to it, whether it's building a well, whether it's building a school or providing access for books. That's an essential core part of our business. Another aspect that we're involved in is something that's known as public-private partnerships, which basically means we work with the public sector, the government. We also work with the private sector, people with money, and we have a partnership, which basically means we are involved in port expansions, in airport expansions in Africa, in building roads, for example, toll roads. So that's another aspect of our business. We're also involved, we're on the consultancy list for the World Bank, and we're also on the consultancy list for the African Development Bank as well. So we tender for projects based upon that. What I was told to speak about was real estate investment in Africa. So when we talk about real estate investment in Africa, everybody automatically thinks money, they're going to get rich. I don't have a get-rich-quick solution. I simply understand real estate because my background is a surveyor, and based upon that, because we work with the public sector, we understand exactly how to maneuver in the markets. So I just wanted to give you guys a quick outline of how things work in Africa. I can't obviously go into depth, but just to give you an outline of what's happening. This year alone, the World Bank have said they're going to give away $59 billion to African governments for infrastructure projects. That means people like you who are here today, if you form a conglomerate, which is basically a group of people who come together, what it then turns into a special purpose vehicle, you can tender for projects in Africa to build schools, to build roads, to build dams. You just have to tender through a specific avenue. So that's what's happening in Africa, so you can understand the quantity of money. That's sub-Saharan Africa, because for some reason they don't really classify the northern part of Africa. It's always sub-Saharan. People yet again want to know how do we maneuver in the African markets. So you have two markets. You have the informal market, and then you have the formal market. The informal market is literally, you just turn up in Africa, you meet a guy, you meet a woman on the road, you give him or her some money, you maneuver, go and get me X, Y, and Z. That's the informal market, and that tends to be the way business is conducted because it's a cash-based society. Then you have the formal markets, when you have to go through a specific land registry. You have to work with the corporations, you have to work with the government sector in order to push through your projects. If you're looking at real estate development, you certainly need to work with the formal market, because when you're doing your due diligence on your groundwork, on your surveying plans, you need the government to assure that all work that you're conducting is on a database. You need to make sure that the government are aware of what you're doing in case there's double selling in land. Therefore, we know who to sue. So that's the situation. In regards to Africa, I always tell people, look, don't just turn up and expect to get rich. You have to understand what the market requires. So unfortunately, there's a lack of affordable housing. Affordable housing for the middle class, affordable housing for civil servants. That's government workers or people who are working in the banks or in the schools. So that's where the market requires affordable housing. There's also a lack of retail malls. And when I tell people you can build retail malls, they get scared. They start thinking of Westfield or malls like Brent Cross. You don't necessarily have to build that. You can build much smaller quantifiable projects which are bankable, which are literally just taking people off the street corner, putting them into quality, sturdy developments, And that way you are able to charge a rent and able to get, in order to get an income based upon that. So that's another way to get involved in real estate. At the same time, you have to understand the market, meaning you have to understand the tax laws. Corporation taxes is in Africa. So you can't just turn up yet again, expect to make money and leave. That's when we're starting to get into things like offshore banking, which we don't want to go into right now. You have to be able to have local partners, because if you're from Europe, it's highly unlikely that you would know someone that's on the ground. So it's best to have an understanding of the local markets. You have to try and find local partners that you trust. I'm not plugging Let's Move Africa, but that's something we get involved in as well. At the same time, it's good to have an understanding of the property life cycle, because if you think that you can just, send £1,000 or £2,000 home every month, it's not going to work. You have to understand how property works, from due diligence, which is just background work, have an understanding of the foundations, how much it will roughly cost, having an understanding of how long it should take in order to develop a particular project. All of this mitigates any instances of losses of your finances. So these are just basic things to consider. I want to just wrap up real quickly on on a different note. Investing in Africa is not only about finance and getting rich quickly. You have to invest in human capital. Human capital meaning the people. I was born here and I went to school. I was a bad boy, so my parents sent me to school on exile. So I was there for a few years, and it was whilst I was there that I realized that people are highly intelligent there, they just don't have the opportunities. So if we're coming from Europe and we have the education of the West, it's good to go back home, invest in your people. If you're doing construction, use local workers. If you're involved in, if you're going to make, I don't know, a Westfield, for example, use local people in that particular place. If you're going to have a hotel, use local people, because, the people are the future. And I think I'll just conclude by saying that Africa has great potential. The people are what make Africa. And if we, the people who are in the West, do not take care of those people, well, we're doing a disservice to them based upon what we know in Europe. So that's just how I want to end my speech. So yeah, thank you for listening.